bad. In this video, we're going to go over 3 common problems that you could find under your hood, and these all involve fluids. We're going to start with the power steering fluid, and that involves the noise that you just heard. For that, let's make our way under the hood. Get out of this thing. Now that noise you just heard is coming from the hydraulic power steering pump. I've heard it plenty of times before, sometimes even as I walk out of a supermarket, I hear a car drive by, and it's making that same whining noise. Now, as far as your power steering fluid, some vehicles, especially the newer ones, may have electronic power steering, in which case you're not going to hear a noise like this. Most other vehicles are going to have hydraulic power steering. That pump is going to circulate the fluid throughout your power steering system. Some vehicles are going to have lines that lead to a cooler and then eventually to a power steering rack or even a steering box of some sort. Others might not even have a cooler. But either way, each one of these areas is someplace you need to check for a leak. If you hear this noise, it means the fluid's low, the pump is circulating fluid and air, it's flowing through that pump, causing that noise, and it's something that needs to be diagnosed. Now let's lead into the common areas that you really want to pay attention to for if you had an issue with the power steering. We talked about the power steering pump. That, of course, is going to have a pulley along the front, which is typically spun by your serpentine belt when the engine's running. Behind that pulley, there's going to be a pump pulley seal. This is common to leak, and if it does, it's going to come down right behind that pump pulley and make its way down towards the ground. Aside from that, you should have 2 lines. You have an inlet and an outlet. Both of those areas need to be checked. Go ahead and follow those lines to where they lead, whether it leads all the way to a cooler, to the power steering rack, or that steering box as I mentioned. Any connection point is going to be a common place for a leak. Other than that, sometimes lines are going to be partly rubber and partly metal, and they need to have some sort of coupler in between. I've seen it plenty of times before where right at that coupler, you start seeing a little bit of a seepage there or even a leak. At that point, you need to go ahead and replace the line. If you have a power steering rack, you want to pay attention to that. Up along the top of the rack where your steering shaft goes into, there's a seal. Other than that, as you make your way along each side of the rack where your inner tie rod ends are, there's going to be a rubber boot. It's a bellows boot. Now you really can't see if there's a leak in this area unless you go ahead and pop it free. Once you pop that free, go ahead and stand aside because sometimes there's so much fluid in there it dumps out all over the ground and makes a big old mess. That means that the rack seals are bad, and typically the fix for this is a replacement of the entire power steering rack. Whenever you do something like this, it's always a good idea to make sure you flush out the entire system with the manufacturer's specified fluid. A quick note too is if you do find that you have low power steering fluid and you find your leak, it's something that you need to fix ASAP. If you put it off, you could cause damage to your power steering pump and a more costly repair. Whatever you find, order it from us, 1aauto.com. Now let's lead into talking about brake issues. Now as far as brake fluid's concerned, this can be a serious safety concern if you find that you do have an issue. If you have a brake fluid leak, you might find that the brake pedal feels like it's soft and squishy, or even if it's extremely bad, the pedal might even go all the way to the floor and your vehicle might not stop. So it's something that you need to diagnose if there is something going on. Obviously you want to be in a safe area. Go ahead and open your hood and you're looking for the master cylinder. That's going to be located on the driver's side of the vehicle. Once you find that master cylinder, you want to go ahead and take a peek inside of here. You want to find where the level should be and where the level is. If you find that the brake fluid is just a little bit low, that could just be an issue where your brake pads are starting to get a little bit worn. So you want to go ahead and take a peek at that. If the fluid's extremely low, more than likely you have a leak and you need to go ahead and diagnose it. For that, like I said, we're at the master cylinder. There's going to be a couple lines that lead off of that. You want to go ahead and follow those lines. Make sure that they're not rotted and damaged in any way. I've seen it before where they're rotted, flaking, and even a little bit wet. That's a serious issue. Other than that, these lines are going to lead to different things. On newer vehicles, you have to have an ABS unit. That's a small block. It has lines going into it and other lines leading out, and those lines will lead all the way over to your brakes. Each wheel has a brake located at it, so you need to make sure that you're following the lines to these areas. Those steel lines are going to typically be led to a flex hose of some sort on most instances, so you need to make sure that the flex hose isn't cracked, worn, or damaged, or even rubbed through. Any connection point between those lines and the hoses, or the hoses to a caliper, or even maybe if you had like a wheel cylinder along your back brakes if you have drum brakes, you need to make sure that you check those connection points. A loose connection can be a brake fluid leak, and that can be a fairly simple fix, but of course you'd want to go ahead and flush out the system. As far as the caliper is concerned, you want to go ahead and remove it from the brakes so you can have a quick look. If you have a small fluid leak, it might only be a tiny bit of fluid making its way out from around that dust boot, which is around the piston. If it's a large fluid leak, you're going to find that you have brake fluid possibly making its way onto the friction material, which can be another braking issue. Any fluid on your friction material, at that point, you need to also replace the brakes, pads, rotors, and calipers at the same time, and of course check those lines. Whenever you replace any type of braking part, you always want to order it from us and flush out the braking system with the manufacturer's specified fluid. Now the next fluid issue we're going to talk about is a lot less safety related. This one's going to involve washer fluid. Now it's not nearly as important as brake fluid or even power steering fluid, but when you need to wash the windshield, it's nice to have some sort of fluid that makes its way up on there so when the wiper blades are going back and forth, it can clean it for you, especially if you've got any type of debris making its way up onto the windshield. Now the good news about the washer fluid is if it is low, you can add a little bit and then test it. Most of the areas that could have a problem are going to be right here under the hood. At the bottom of your washer fluid tank, you're going to have a washer fluid pump, and that's going to be pumping the washer fluid through some lines all the way up to your washer fluid nozzles, which are typically located on the hood, or even possibly the wiper cowl, or even on the wiper arms themselves. Either way, there has to be some sort of line that makes its way from here all the way up to that area. Common areas that you want to check for leaks would be right at where that pump goes into the reservoir. There should be a small rubber seal. That can be a leak. Other than that, you have a hose that connects to the pump and then leads all the way up to those nozzles as I mentioned. You need to go ahead and check that line. It could be leaking from anywhere between the pump all the way up to those washer nozzles. If you did find that you had a washer fluid leak, possibly at that reservoir and pump area, it comes as a kit. You can order that all at the same time. It's going to come with the new hose for you so you can lead it all the way up to the washer fluid nozzles. It's a fairly easy replacement overall. And you can order it from us at 1AAuto.com.